The night swallowed them whole as Jessica drove down a deserted highway in her beat-up sedan. Marcus sat in the front seat, staring out the window with clenched fists. Jay and Lily huddled in the back, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like home. Jessica gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles whitened. Every shadow on the road felt like flashing lights, every sound like sirens closing in. She knew what she had done. Kidnapping, they would call it. A felony. But how could she abandon them? "Where are we going, Miss Jessica?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "Somewhere safe," she whispered, though fear clawed at her throat. She didn't know what safe meant anymore. They stopped at a gas station 2 towns over. Jessica pawned her wedding ring for cash and bought peanut butter, bread, and bottled water. As they sat in the dim car, eating with their fingers, Marcus looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Why are you doing this for us?" he asked. Jessica swallowed hard. "Because someone should have done it for me." She didn't know it then, but this decision would follow her for 25 years. That night, Jessica made a bed out of old blankets on the living room floor. The kids huddled together like frightened kittens, clutching one another as if the world might snatch them away. She sat in the armchair, watching them breathe, her heart heavy with questions she dared not ask. Who leaves 3 children in the cold? Where had they come from? Jessica wasn't wealthy, far from it. She worked double shifts just to keep lights on, but as she stared at their tiny, exhausted faces, something inside her shifted. She remembered being 10 years old, sitting on church steps after her mother left, waiting for someone to notice her. No one ever did. The memory burned like a scar, and Jessica swore these kids would never feel that kind of emptiness again. At dawn, she made pancakes from the last of her flour. When Marcus whispered, "Thank you, Mum," his voice cracked like glass. Jessica smiled, hiding her own tears. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. "You're safe now." But safety was a fragile dream, one that life was about to shatter in ways Jessica couldn't imagine. The man at the door wore a grey suit and a badge. Behind him, a police cruiser idled on the curb, lights flashing silently in the winter dusk. "Ma'am," the social worker said, his voice clipped. "We have reports of 3 minors living here without legal guardianship." Jessica's throat went dry. Reports? From who? Neighbors, maybe. She'd noticed curtains twitching lately, whispers when she walked past. "They're safe here," she said firmly, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "They had nowhere else." "That's not your decision," he replied coldly. "You need to let us take them." Lily clung to Jessica's leg, sobbing. "Don't make us go." Marcus stepped in front of his siblings like a tiny soldier, eyes blazing with fear. Jessica felt the weight of the moment crush her chest. She could obey, or fight. And fighting meant breaking the law. She shut the door, hard, then locked it. Her heart thundered as fists pounded from the other side. That night, Jessica packed a bag. She didn't know where they were going, only that she'd rather risk everything than let those kids vanish into the system. Jessica's heart slammed against her ribs as the blinding lights painted the car in blue and red. Lily screamed. Jay buried his face in his hands. Marcus clenched his jaw, silent tears rolling down his cheeks. "Miss Jessica," he whispered, voice trembling. She turned to them, forcing a calm smile she didn't feel. "It's okay, baby. Everything's gonna be okay." But it wasn't. She stepped out slowly, hands raised to the icy night air. Rain dripped from her hair as officers swarmed, guns drawn. They yanked her arms behind her back and snapped cold steel cuffs onto her wrists. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for kidnapping and endangering minors," one officer barked. "Kidnapping?" Jessica cried, twisting to look at the kids. "I saved them. They had nobody." Lily sobbed so hard her tiny body shook. Marcus lunged forward, screaming, "Don't take her, please!" But 2 officers held him back. Jessica's last glimpse of them was through the rear window of the squad car. 3 terrified faces pressed against the glass as the only mother they'd ever known disappeared into the night. She didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning of 25 years in hell. 25 years later, Jessica sat in the prison yard, grey streaking her hair, her hands calloused from decades of labor. She had learned to stop hoping. Freedom wasn't for women like her. Then one morning, a guard called her name. "Visit, legal team." Confused, Jessica walked into the visitor's room and froze. 3 faces turned toward her, older now, but unmistakable. Marcus, tall and confident in a suit. Jay, calm and steady. Lily, radiant, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Miss Jessica," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "We never forgot. We're here to bring you home." Her knees buckled. Marcus caught her in his arms as Jay slid a stack of papers across the table. Petitions, affidavits, proof of the broken system that failed them all. They had fought for years, becoming lawyers, advocates, fighters for the truth. And now, after decades of injustice, they'd won. When the warden opened those prison gates, Jessica stepped out into the sunlight and into the arms of the family she had created with love, not blood. For months, Jessica lived like a ghost. She changed motels every week, paid in cash, and avoided anyone who might ask questions. The kids never complained, though their childhood slipped away with every mile they traveled. Marcus became her lookout, scanning for police cars whenever they stopped for groceries. Jay learned to stay quiet, his laughter fading into whispers. Little Lily clung to Jessica's hand, her tiny voice asking only, "Will they find us?" Jessica always smiled and said no, even as fear hollowed her out inside. She missed her old life, her job, her home, her friends, but there was no turning back. The state would brand her a criminal, and worse, they'd scatter the kids into foster homes, tearing apart the only family they had left. One rainy night, Jessica pulled over on a country road, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark circles, tired eyes, a stranger staring back. "How long can I keep this up?" she whispered. The answer came 2 weeks later, when flashing blue lights filled her windshield and a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. The children shuffled inside, their feet leaving faint, dirty prints on the faded linoleum. Jessica closed the door and turned the lock with a soft click. The youngest, a girl, maybe 4, clung to her brother's torn jacket, her tiny fingers stiff from the cold. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Jessica asked, kneeling to meet her eyes. The little girl hid her face. "I'm Marcus," the oldest boy said quickly. "This is Lily. And that's Jay." The middle child, a boy of 8, stared at the pot on the stove like it was gold. Jessica's chest tightened. She didn't have much, but she ladled soup into 3 chipped bowls and watched them devour every bite. Hunger had taught them silence. As they ate, Jessica studied them. No coats, no bags, just shadows of kids who'd been running too long. "Where's your mama?" she asked gently. Marcus paused, spoon trembling. She ain't coming back." Jessica's throat closed. She didn't know what their story was, but she knew one thing. She couldn't send them back into the night. Days turned into weeks. Jessica enrolled Marcus, Jay, and little Lily in school under her last name. She didn't tell anyone the truth, not even her closest friends. What would they say? A single black woman taking in 3 abandoned children with no paperwork. It sounded like trouble waiting to happen. Still, their laughter filled the house, chasing away the silence that had haunted Jessica for years. She worked extra shifts, sold old jewelry, even skipped meals so the kids never went hungry. It wasn't easy, but for the first time, Jessica felt like she had a purpose. Then came the knock. Not the gentle one that had brought the children into her life, but a hard, pounding fist against the door. "Open up, child services!" Jessica froze. Marcus dropped his spoon, eyes wide with terror. The sound of Lily's crying sliced through the air. Jessica's mind raced. If they took the kids, where would they go? Back to the streets, back to the nightmare they'd escaped. She opened the door slowly, heart pounding like a war drum, unaware that this moment would set her on a path toward a life sentence.
The wind howled outside as Jessica stirred a pot of soup in her tiny kitchen. Bills were stacked on the counter like silent threats, but tonight, hunger was her only battle, until she heard the knock. 3 soft raps, then silence. Jessica frowned. Who would come this late? Pulling her worn sweater tight, she opened the door and froze. 3 children stood on her porch, barefoot, clothes torn, faces pale with cold. The oldest, a boy no older than 12, stepped forward. His lips trembled.
"Please, ma'am, we got nowhere else."
Jessica's heart clenched. She had nothing to give, yet their hollow eyes pierced through her struggle. She glanced at the dark street behind them, empty, lifeless. No parents, no home. Every instinct told her this was trouble, but she remembered nights when she'd prayed for someone to save her, so she opened the door wider. She didn't know it then, but that single act of kindness would bind their lives together. And 25 years later, those same children would return to stop Jessica from dying in prison.